Guys, thank you for tuning in to the Hammer and Chisel Performance Podcast. Before we dive into this conversation, I just wanted to set the stage and give a little preface to this episode. So I have on Paul Barnett coming over from the bodybuilding side, and this episode is all about performance-enhancing drugs. We dive into three major categories of PEDs, going into anabolic steroids, growth hormone, and insulin. And for most of the episode, we are covering steroids. We touch on the insulin and the growth hormone. Now, I've got a pretty mixed audience here, right? People from sports performance, strength and conditioning, bodybuilding, powerlifting, strongman, fitness enthusiasts, nutritionists. And this is an interesting topic. And it is a topic where there is just a ton of reckless misinformation floating around out there. So the purpose of this episode was to kind of take things back to square one and just give a solid 101 level overview of these categories of performance enhancing drugs, right? What are they? Where do they come from? How do they work? How do you use them? What are the side effects associated with them? So if you're coming over here from Paul's channel, from the bodybuilding side of things, a lot of this stuff is not going to be new information to you. We are not really diving into advanced protocols, dosing, stuff like that. Again, this is more of a kind of a level one overview, but a good one. And for my audience, for a lot of you, this is going to be a great one, a great source of information. But even if you are more well-versed on this stuff and you're coming from Paul's channel, you're coming from the bodybuilding world, it's always good just to sort of, hey, go back to the basics, just get a good refresher on just some good quality information. It's easy to get lost and caught up in some of the bullshit out there. Now, I should definitely say we do not encourage or endorse the use of these items, but the reality is people are going to use them. And with there being so much bad information out there, I want to be a good source of quality, reasonable information. So again, this is not an endorsement of these things, but it is just a source of good information, because good, real information is better than no information, in my opinion. So anyway, guys, without further ado, enjoy this episode with Paul Barnett. All right, guys, welcome back to this new episode of the Hammer and Chisel Performance Podcast. I'm your host, John Heck. Before we get into this conversation, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to the sponsors of the podcast, Troponin Supplements. They got me decked out in the gear as always. And of course, pop the tab of ATP, my favorite supplement from them. It's a big dose of caffeine with a powerful nootropic. It's like the limitless pill for me. It just expands my mind a little bit, gets me locked in and focused and ready to have a great conversation with the amazing guests that I bring on. So getting into today's episode, we're going over to the bodybuilding world. So the guy I have on, I've been following him for a few years now and got to know him on a personal level here over the last year. And I think he's just one of the better resources of information out in the bodybuilding world. I think, the bodybuilding content sphere is kind of the Wild West, right? There's a lot of misinformation being circulated, and then there are a few resources for high quality information, and I would consider today's guest one of those. So Paul Barnett, Big Paul, welcome to the show.
What's going on, man? That was hopefully I can live up to all that. There was a lot of accolades there, man.
Yeah, well, you know what? You've kind of blown up here over the last few years. I remember just seeing you on social media every now and then when I started working with our mutual friend Justin Harris, and then next thing I knew, I see you're kind of blowing up on YouTube, and you got your own podcast and all that going. So I started tuning in more. So every time I was doing my own diet, doing my cardio, I'd have your podcast in my ear. So it's been fun getting to know you here recently.
I'm just an old guy bodybuilder. I love this stuff. I've actually been doing this off and on for 30 or so years, but my career before really prevented me from being very public with the stuff that that I do. And then I kind of took a bodybuilding hiatus through my 30s and when I had kids and ran a business and did all that shit. And now I'm back to just hopefully paying forward some of the information that I've learned over the years. Really, I started off as a personal trainer in a gym when I was 19. Did that for 5 years. I was a nutritionist and personal trainer and kind of started learning about PEDs back then. It was just, the information was terrible in the 90s. It was just whatever you could learn from the bro in the gym that was the biggest.
Right.
That's how we learned it. It was top secret too. Like you knew that guy was doing something that you weren't, and you had to get into the circle of trust to learn. And then there were some books around at that time, a few books, that I go back to that were kind of, hidden. There was stuff that Dan Duchesne was a guy. I think the first steroid book I ever read, it was in the 90s, and a lot of the information in there was correct, and a lot of it was not so correct. But this was pre-internet days, and you just kind of learn from other dudes. It's how Bromus got started.
Yeah, and we're going to get into a little bit sort of just the evolution of how much information is being circulated on the topic. And I'm in a little bit of a similar boat as you in that for the large majority of my career up to this point, I've been unable to speak on these topics. Obviously, working in football, strength and conditioning, diving into PEDs is very much a taboo subject. But now that I'm liberated in the private sector, working for myself, hey, we can have these conversations out in the open. So just setting the stage for this episode a little bit. We're going to cover a lot of PED content here. Talking to Paul before we started recording a little bit, I've got a mixed audience, right? I've got some people from the bodybuilding world who a lot of this stuff is not going to be new information, but it's always good just to kind of get back to some of the basics and just, touch up on your understanding of all this. But a lot of my audience coming from powerlifting, strongman, just sports performance, general fitness enthusiasts, a lot of those people are not very well versed on this topic, and they don't know, which information that they're hearing on the internet is correct. Who are the good resources? Who are the shitty resources for this kind of information? And I've got a lot of people who are interested in this sort of thing. So just want to give a disclaimer to the audience. We're going to go into PED talk, but we are in no way, shape, or form condoning or encouraging any of this stuff. We just want to provide a little bit of an educational discussion around the topic. So whether you choose to do these things, that is on you. Like I said, we are not encouraging or condoning that. We are not doctors. We are a couple of meatheads who just happen to have a pretty decent education on the stuff. So, approach this with caution. We certainly don't want to just throw this information around casually, but I think having good information is better than having either no information or, getting the information from the wrong source. So, Paul, I know you obviously talk about these topics a lot. You've got plenty more information to offer other than the PED world, but I recently had Justin Harris on, and we went deep into diet and into contest prep and all those things. I've got other people coming on really talking about the training side, but I thought you would be a great resource to go into the drug and supplemental side of all this.
Well, everybody loves to talk about steroids, that's for sure. It's funny because athletes and bodybuilders, you think about it, biohacking is a popular term you hear right now. We are the original biohackers.
Yeah.
We are the guys that tried to figure out to get the most out of the human body. And it really kind of, it goes back. Testosterone was first synthesized in the 1930s. It was a German scientist, Adolf Budendart, if I remember right, that first synthesized it. And it was, I don't think they realized what they had. And I believe it was in the 1950s, if I recall correctly, that the Russians dominated the Olympics. And everybody was like, okay, what the heck is going on here? And Dr. John Ziegler synthesized D-ball at that time in the 1950s, and that was used, it's pretty well known now, but it was used by our Olympic athletes, and it kind of just went from there. and additional steroids were developed. Most of them were originally used for medical purposes. A lot of them are anti-cancer drugs, things like used to also drugs used to treat anemia, other conditions. But the hilarious part was, if you look at old medical manuals, up until the 1980s, they said that they didn't cause any kind of athletic performance or growth, which is just absolutely hilarious. We knew otherwise. We knew otherwise, but bodybuilders really started, figuring the stuff out in the 60s. It's kind of when bodybuilding took off, during the 60s. You think of Arnold and those guys, and they were using very simple stuff back then. It was just mostly D-ball. They didn't even use testosterone back then, but it just kind of took off from then. And then now we're sort of in a golden age of performance enhancement in all areas, when it comes to cognitive enhancement, when it comes to when we're talking about mitochondrial efficiency, we're talking about metabolic enhancement. There's just a ton of information, a ton of stuff that's happening right now. Peptides, there's some really cool and interesting peptides, and all this stuff is just going to continue to progress with the advent of AI. And we're sort of in a golden age of performance enhancement right now. It's really, really a cool time to be alive. And there is a lot of information out there. There's a lot of bad information. There's a lot of good information. I really had a kind of a moral thing about doing this. Like, I'm going to put myself out on the line. I'm like, do I want to risk myself, risk my family? Because I've had some success in business. Do I really need to do this? But I just saw so much bad information, and I wanted to help people. There was no help when I was coming up in this, and there's just so much bad information and stuff that was just, I see guys harming themselves. And ultimately what my goal is to put out information to hopefully reduce some harm, allow guys to make educated decisions if they wanted to enhance performance, and do it in an intelligent manner. That was kind of really my objective.
Yeah, there is, you talk about kind of the golden age of performance enhancement, and certainly from the advances in pharmaceuticals and technology, and everything that we have at our disposal today is light years beyond what it's ever been. And so is all the amount of information out there. So, I was going to ask your opinion. You go on social media, you go on YouTube, and it's the hottest topic that anyone in bodybuilding wants to talk about. You're instantly going to get clicks and views if you talk about PEDs, which I think makes it it makes it a topic that's attractive for unqualified people to talk about. And, you go on Instagram, you'll see people doing their top 5 tier lists of PEDs and all this and that. In a way, it's probably a good thing that there's more information. It's very accessible because there are good resources of information out there. Whereas, like you said, in the 90s, early 2000s, you're limited to talking to the big meathead at the Gold's Gym, or maybe getting on, some of the forums. Whereas now you can go on Instagram and YouTube and find a wealth of information. But on the other hand, like you said, you're also just having, every Joe Schmo and their mother talking about this stuff too, trying to get clicks. Do you think the amount of information out there is doing more good or more bad overall?
There are, it's a mixed bag. There are way more guys using shit now and using it irresponsibly than there was. Like, I look at just dosing and types of protocols and stuff, like what we considered aggressive back in the 90s now is what just like every gym bro's doing. It's so, and then like, I think people get obsessed with every new chemical or compound that comes out, and it's easy to go down the path of taking every fucking thing under the sun. The thing that does worry me is it does seem like people that have addictive and compulsive personalities, I see a lot of young guys that just absolutely are wrecking themselves. I do a lot of consults. I probably do 400 or 500 consults a year. And the number one thing I do consults for is blood work, and usually just guys that have fucked themselves up, that have screwed themselves up from overdoing stuff and not being intelligent about it. And I think the thing that people forget, that it's not a panacea of fixing everything. It's a tool. It's a tool in the toolbox. It doesn't do the work for you. It doesn't eat the meals for you. It doesn't wake up early to do fasted cardio. It doesn't do any of that stuff. It's just a tool to allow you to work more efficiently and to be more productive. And I think a lot of young guys see it as a shortcut or just a cool thing to do. And a lot of the people it's aggravating to see the guys that get the most views and follows on YouTube are usually the biggest, and on social media in general, are usually the biggest idiots.
Yeah, no kidding. It's always the loud voices, right? That get the most views and attention. And just when it comes to the PEDs, there's just sort of, from a psychological standpoint, there's kind of this mystique around it, right? Number one, there's kind of that shortcut component, right? Hey, I just need to jump on gear. That's going to take me next level. And, I won't need to work as hard in the gym or be so focused on sleep and nutrition, yada, yada. But then there's also, like I said, kind of that mystery, that mystique surrounding it. What's it going to feel like? What's it going to be like if I get on it? So, it's just so attractive to people. And I think you talk to, any successful bodybuilder, anyone who's been in this for a while, and the PEDs, like, it starts off as the most interesting, captivating topic. And then over the years, it just becomes the most boring, uninteresting topic, right? You talk to the bodybuilders, and most of these top guys are talking way more about their diets and their training. You get to the top, everyone's just doing the same basic bread and butter shit. It's all the bros and the young kids who are doing all these complex, unorthodox cycles and, getting into the weeds with all this stuff. Do you think, let's before we get into some of this stuff, maybe we should just define a few categories of PEDs, right? I think, some people, they hear PEDs, they think just steroids, right? They don't necessarily know all the various categories that are there. Would it be fair to maybe, at least in our context, talking about muscle, physique, strength, the biggest categories we could go with would be anabolic steroids, AAS, anabolic androgenic steroids, growth hormone, insulin, and then maybe kind of create this miscellaneous category, right? Peptides and your fat burners, your T3, your DNP, and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, you have metabolic aids, you have anabolics, you have growth factors, you have anything that's going to help with nutrient partitioning, things like insulin, and there's other drugs that, metformin, things like that. GLP-1s now that are going to help with that. There's a variety of different peptides that do different things. I mean, GH and insulin are peptides. Peptides are very cool. There's a lot of cool stuff. And don't get me wrong, I love the drugs and the pharmacology and learning about it and leveraging it efficiently. And there's still some stupid stuff that some of the top pros do. But for the most part, they've cracked the formula. They know what it is. And and what works in bodybuilding wouldn't work in other sports too. So I work with a variety of different people. It's definitely, as far as PED protocols go, approaches would be a little bit different if you, like, let's say if you were a cyclist versus a open class bodybuilder, or if you were a football player, it would be a much different thing. You have to figure out what problem you're trying to solve. Like, I would imagine for somebody who's an athlete, like a football player, like primarily, first and foremost, the thing that they would want to enhance is the ability to recover from the beatings that they're taking. Enhance recovery, prevent injury, allow themselves to work harder on the field. It's not so much to be the biggest, most jacked guy out there. I don't think that's the primary objective. Whereas in bodybuilding, it's all hypertrophy, to be the biggest physique on the field. Cycling, it's going to be, some endurance. MMA athletes, it's going to be endurance. You're going to try to enhance endurance. Maybe strength is a little bit of it. The same thing with football. But, so I think you have to define what problem you're trying to solve too before you come up with protocols.
Right. Yeah. And when you get into the endurance athletes, the cyclists, you even getting into the world of like the EPOs and
red blood cell production, oxygenation, mitochondrial efficiency. I mean, there's a bunch of different stuff.
Yeah. And touching on the football side of things, I feel like there's this just big notion that all professional team sport athletes are all on steroids or all on PEDs. And I see that misinformation being spread a lot because when you come from the world of bodybuilding and powerlifting and strongman and just gym culture in general, so many people are on PEDs. So they look at these top athletes like, well, obviously they're on them too. And I, coming from the football world myself, having played and coached in the NFL and Division I college football, I can say very wholeheartedly, there are very, very few of those players who are on anabolic steroids. To your point, it's just not necessarily a great tool for that job, right?
Right.
I mean, the separating variable between a Division I wide receiver and an NFL wide receiver is probably not going to be muscle mass and just pure gym type strength, right? It's going to be athleticism, their ability to change directions and bend and control their body in space and things like that. Just things that anabolics have no benefit towards.
A lot of that's just genetics too.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and coming from that world, I know there are some guys who, like you said, they optimize the recovery side of things. So
Yep.
there are guys in the off season I know will use growth hormone and use peptides like BPC 157,
Yep.
TB 500, which have for some reason been outlawed by WADA here recently. But yeah, there's this notion that everyone in professional team sport athletes they're all on steroids, and I can tell you from experience, it's just not the case. But you walk into a Gold's Gym and the vast majority of steroid users are just your typical gym bro, gym rats, right? I think it's something like 99% of users are just non-competitive gym bros. Is that about correct?
Yeah, I saw a number. Of course, it's just an estimate. There's no way for them to know for sure, but it was something like 1 in 15 people that go to the gym, men that go to the gym, use PEDs, and how they're common amongst women now. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of women are on them too, and they are amazing tools. And to your point on the football thing, I think about it like if I were an athlete, like if I were to be a professional athlete, if I were to play football, I played basketball. Football wasn't my sport, but I would think for me, I would just want to optimize recovery. That would be my primary
Right.
objective, and whatever tools necessary to do that, to keep myself healthy, keep myself on the field, so I could train harder and be better at my craft.
And the way you define recovery, it's different depending on the context, right? If you're a bodybuilder, a power lifter, recovery for you generally means recovering soft tissue or CNS coming
Right.
off of your training, right? And recovery is essentially synonymous with growth and strength adaptations, right? But when you're talking about recovering for a football player, you're talking about just joints and just
Yep.
blunt force trauma type recovery. Yep. These are things that anabolics have absolutely no effect on. But just kind of looking at the how pervasive the anabolic use is among the gym bros, is it just vastly easier to obtain the stuff these days compared to back in the 90s to early 2000s?
It's there was definitely a gatekeeper to getting access to it, like back in the 90s and the early 2000s. Now, I mean, there's a million different websites overseas that you can just go and order and have it delivered to your damn house. Whereas like it used to be, you had to know that dude in the gym who had access. It was like I remember guys going down to Mexico once a year and loading up and then coming back, and then
right,
you had to know that guy, and that guy had to trust you. And it wasn't like you could pick and choose whatever you wanted to be on. It was whatever he had.
Right.
And it was very limited, and that's why guys didn't take as much. Also, I think the quality was probably better back then. You can't say for sure, but the majority of what people were using was pharmaceutical grade stuff. It wasn't something that was made in somebody's bathtub.
Right. I hear that narrative a lot, right? That, the stuff was so much better and more potent back in the 90s.
Straight from a pharmacy. I mean, it was real pharmaceuticals.
Right. Compared to now just being synthesized by, average Joes, like you said, and, at home. And
well, you can't tell me that the gym bro in his garage is accurately filtering and measuring everything and has quality control in place and is in a sterile environment. I mean, there's all these factors like that 200 milligram testosterone you get. It might be 140 milligrams. It might be 240 milligrams. It might not even be fucking testosterone as far as you know.
Yeah. Sometimes you got to put into perspective the fact that if you're getting stuff from an underground lab, you're getting it from a drug dealer, right? You're getting it from a essentially a criminal drug dealer who may not have the highest level of principle and integrity.
And your best interest in mind.
Yeah, exactly. Right. They're trying to make money. Okay. So,
it was definitely, the supply of things was very limited. You had to know somebody. And there weren't all these exotic compounds available too. Like it was just basically just testosterone, deca, D-bol, anadrol. I mean, just equipoise, just really basic stuff. That was it. That was all really most guys had access to.
Right. Well, let's get into some of the basics of anabolic steroids, and then we can kind of go into some of the basics of growth hormone and then insulin, and then touch on some of the various peptides and miscellaneous compounds that are out there. So let's start with kind of a testosterone 101, right? Because, testosterone is going to be the kind of the father of all anabolic steroids, right? Every compound is essentially some sort of a chemical derivative of testosterone. So it was originally synthesized in the 30s?
Yeah, in the 30s. It was the Germans. If I recall correctly, it was testosterone suspension, what they initially used, and then eventually which is just a testosterone concentrate, which is just in and out of your system. And then they figured out adding an ester to it to delay and control the peak of the drug and to make it last longer. So we have testosterone, enanthate, cypionate, things like that, various esters of it. So whereas something like a suspension is going to have like a 3-hour half-life. It's in and out. That's not really going to do a whole lot for your performance enhancement. It might give you a good rush and make you aggressive for a period of time, but that's not going to do a whole lot for performance enhancement.
Right. You have to take it multiple times throughout the day.
Yeah, and that's not... they realized that was not practical. So some clever scientists eventually realized adding an ester to it, which that ester is cleaved off over a period of time to delay the delivery of the drug from the depot when you inject it. So that was eventually where we got to. So we're talking about most guys, and they're taking some version, either testosterone cypionate or enanthate, which has a 5 to 7 day half-life, something like that. So in theory, you would only have to take a shot once a week.
Right. And when Paul talks about esters, just kind of putting it in more simple terms, it's basically just a carbon structure that the hormone itself is bound to, and it just acts as this time release mechanism, right? So you can inject less frequently, it stays in the system longer. So how does testosterone, just kind of 101 surface level, how does testosterone work? What does it do? Exogenous testosterone.
It's the parent hormone, really, in the male body. It's sort of the master hormone in the male body. There's going to be a portion of it that gets converted to estradiol, which is estrogen. We do need some estrogen in our body. It's not an exact amount, but somewhere around 20% of the hormone actually gets converted to estrogen. Estrogen is necessary for, things like bone health, cognitive health. It's cardiovascular health, lipid metabolism, things like that. Estrogen is necessary to a certain degree in a man's body. It also reduces to dihydrotestosterone, DHT, which is the sex hormone, the primary sex hormone in the male. That's going to be responsible for, growing your beard, giving you sex drive, things like that. About 10% of it, if I recall correctly, gets reduced to DHT. And that's why we start with a base of testosterone for performance enhancement. It makes the most sense. It's a bioidentical hormone. And then other hormones, other anabolics were derived off of the testosterone molecule to leverage certain features. So, for example, like a lot of it in the 50s and 60s, they were looking for anti-cancer drugs for women for breast cancer. Some of it. So something like Masteron was developed as well, but they wanted to reduce the uh, the androgenic effects of the hormone and increase the anabolic effects of the hormone. So they modified the structure to achieve certain things with it. Um,
For my
and
audience,
what
do you mind defining anabolic versus androgenic?
anabolic effects would be the growth effects. Androgenic would be the sex effects. So like hair growth, um, your deepening of your voice, sex drive, all these other things that go along with it. So androgens, you get to a certain point where there's only so much androgen you can tolerate, and especially if we're going to be using it in women and children, which they were trying to design, they wanted it to selectively bind with the androgen receptor, so we have less of these effects and more of the growth and healing effects that come along with the drugs. And some of the drugs do specific and unique things. Like there's not just androgen receptors in the brain. There's androgen or in the muscle. There's androgen receptors in the brain and other tissues in the body. Um, so when we selectively bind with those receptors, we want it to do certain things. So we have to be. They were engineering those drugs at that time. It was sort of the golden age. There really hasn't been much done since then. So we basically all the AASs that we have now were all developed in the 50s and 60s for the most part. And so now we're stuck with all these old things. And that was kind of what an attempt with SARMs. They were an attempt to leverage
That's
the,
exactly where I was just going to go. Yeah.
yeah, they were selective androgen receptor modulators. They were trying to get rid of all of the androgenic effects and leverage certain anabolic effects from the drugs, but they just didn't work that well. So that's why the pharmaceutical companies threw them in the trash. And that's why bros are taking them. No, they're non-steroidal SARMs.
Right. It seems like a lot of young people kind of see SARMs as like this gateway PED, right? They don't want to go straight to the injectables, right? Which are viewed as hardcore, as more side effects. So they go to these SARMs, which it's just as, not that the market for steroids is some highly regulated market, but I mean the SARMs, like you never know what you're getting, right? There's some crazy high percentage of SARMs that were incorrectly dosed or not what they were labeled as, and people see them as, like you said, this basically side effect free version of steroids where you're only going to get the anabolic muscle tissue type effects, none of those androgenic effects. But that's not the case. You see people taking SARMs and they are getting side effects, they are having their own natural production shut down, and all the negatives, right?
Yep. Yeah, so the
And
SARMs were an attempt to isolate the certain effects from that they wanted to um, exhibit on the androgen receptor, and it was an experiment. A lot of the stuff was just experimental, and it just a lot of times I see with SARMs they actually are worse for you than just taking the side effects are worse. I've seen dudes with high liver values. I've seen guys with all sorts of skewed lipids and other shit that happens from taking these things. The unintended consequences and side effects, and really, you know, possibly in the future we'll have selective androgen receptor modulators. Now with the advent of AI, that may be completely side effect free. We may be able to engineer those types of things. So if the pharmaceutical companies are researching that again, I don't know. I would assume that they are at some point, but really, like the majority of the research on this stuff, what we have now, like I said, was just pretty much stopped in the 70s.
how is it that SARMs kind of operate in this sort of like gray area of legality, right? Where you can
They're
kind of
not
purchase them
scheduled, from what I
online, and
understand.
right, you can kind of get them in certain supplement stores over the counter almost. And I mean, back in the early 2000s, of course, there were all the pro hormones being sold at your local supplement store, which have obviously since been outlawed. I'm sure you had your experiences with the pro hormone era.
Yeah, like Turinabol and shit like that. They were actually steroids.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
let's talk about Prohormones briefly. I'm sure a lot of people, from that era have had those experiences with them. What exactly is a Prohormone?
Well, it was just some clever chemist that figured out that they listed all the things that should be all the steroids that should be scheduled. When they scheduled all of them, and some clever chemist figured out, oh, if we change this, this is technically not on the scheduled list, and thus we had Prohormones, which were just really just steroids.
Were they marketed as just some sugar coated supplement? I'm assuming they weren't just overtly marketing them as, oh, these are basically steroids.
I'm trying to think of some of the ones that we had. I think there was what was the one that Mark McGuire got busted taking? That one, androstenedione. Yeah, that one. That one is actually a precursor, but I mean, some of them were just straight up steroids. There was I think Turinabol originally was one. There was God damn it, what was the other?
There's Superdrol on
Superdrol. Yeah, Superdrol. Yeah, that was another one. It's crazy that you could go into GNC and buy that shit 20 years ago.
I know. And when you mentioned the word precursor, and basically meaning, right, you ingest the prohormone, which enters the body as this precursor and ultimately gets converted into an actual steroid hormone in the system. Is that correct?
Correct.
What drove that market ultimately being shut down and outlawed?
Well, they figured out the FDA quickly figured out these guys are selling steroids, and they wised up real quick. I think what the really drove a lot of this, and you think when things got really clamped down, is the Sammy Sosa, Mark McGuire battle for the home run battle, and it was really the baseball nerds. Right. They were upset these guys were breaking records, and in hindsight, those guys weren't really even. It wasn't even Prohormones they were using. They were using real shit. They were getting it prescribed by doctors and whatnot. A great documentary, if you've never seen it, is Screwball. It's about that. There was this doctor down in Florida that was prescribing steroids to all the baseball players.
Yeah, and there's the Balco Labs, right?
Yeah, Balco, yeah.
Who was the chemist with Balco again?
Was it Victor Conti? I think the guy's name was, right?
He was one of the guys involved, but there was a guy who, the actual chemist himself, the name escapes me. But yeah, it was really kind of MLB baseball that was responsible for a lot of this stuff ultimately being federally outlawed. I mean, this stuff used to be legal back in the 80s, in college football back in the 80s, everyone was taking steroids, and it was legal.
Well, all steroids are derived from a cholesterol molecule. The androstenedione is just part of the pathway of steroidogenesis, and it was sort of a precursor. I don't know that it really did a whole lot, but anytime you hear a steroidal molecule, it's derived from cholesterol.
Right. Guys, thank you for tuning in and supporting the podcast. I just wanted to take a minute to give a shout out over to my guys at Troponin Supplements. So they're the sponsor of the podcast, and in my opinion, they carry the best supplements on the market, and it's not even close. And they're the one company that I've wanted to align myself with. As a nutrition coach working with NFL football players, other professional athletes, strongman competitors, bodybuilders, powerlifters, fitness enthusiasts, endurance athletes, I have to be very particular about any supplement company I endorse. And with Troponin Supplements, frankly, it was a no-brainer. These are the products I've been using myself for the last few years before I ever became involved with the company. I know the owner personally, Justin Harris. He is one of the brilliant minds in the bodybuilding industry, and we've talked, and all he has wanted to do is just bring some of the elite top-of-the-line products to the market, and that's what he's done. So these are the products I recommend and endorse to all my athletes, all my clients. I use myself, and I want to pass this along to you guys as well. So I'm going to highlight a couple products here. First and foremost, we've got the ATP. This is a high dose of caffeine paired with a very powerful nootropic. I take this before work. I take this before I podcast. This is going to give you a great boost in mood, in focus, memory enhancement. You're just going to feel like you took the Limitless pill when you use ATP. It's an effervescent tablet. You drop it in your water, it dissolves, tastes great. The next product, Field Rations. This is the premier intra-workout supplement on the market right now. It's a one-stop shop for all your intra-workout needs. It's based in highly branched cyclic dextrin, contains essential amino acids, electrolytes, tastes amazing. I use this within every training session. Then we've got the Suppressor Max. This is awesome for controlling your blood sugar. It's got a high dose of berberine, but then has complementary ingredients that are going to keep the berberine bioavailable and stay in your system longer. This is the best blood sugar product on the market. If you're bulking, if you're eating a ton of food, if you're using a cheat meal, this is a great product for you. And then finally, I love this one. I've always had sleep issues. Hit the Rack. This is one of the best sleep products I've ever tried. I use it about 30 minutes before bed most nights, and this has been the one supplement that has actually helped me fall asleep and stay asleep. And then of course, we got the Troponin T logo bodybuilding jersey and the hat. We've got great apparel on the site. So guys, check out Troponin supplements. You can find the link in the show notes, in the bio, or you can simply just Google Troponin supplements. Use code HECK, capital HECK, at checkout for a discount. Check them out, guys. These are some of the best products on the market. Well, okay, so just going back into the basics of testosterone, from a pure practical standpoint, someone begins taking exogenous testosterone. What does it generally do for the human body? From a, like I said, a practical standpoint as it pertains to growth and strength and recovery and all these things.
Well, it depends on the dose. I think the FDA, don't quote me on this, but I think they recently changed their guidelines for hormone replacement. But from what I recall, it was up to 200. I've seen up to TRT, up to 300 milligrams before. There's physiological replacement. There's super physiological replacements. Generally, I mean, things that you're going to see improved in men it's a sexually dimorphic hormone. So women do make a little bit of testosterone. It's a very, very small amount, but essentially you're going to give yourself a sex change if you take testosterone as a woman. Right. So but things that you're going to see: an increased sex drive, a lot of times improved mood. Guys, you'll see a lot of guys that are deficient in testosterone. There's a ton of it now. I see a lot of young dudes that are, have really low testosterone levels. It's crazy. A lot of times guys will report being anxious and depressed, and a lot of times it's probably because they're in a low testosterone environment and they have high estrogen on top of it from being obese. As you're fatter, that's another thing. You're more of your hormones are going to convert to estrogen. Estradiol, aromatase is made in the fat cells in men. So as you get fatter, your estrogen conversion is going to be higher. So it's just sort of like this bad slippery slope that young men get themselves into, where they're not active, they get fat, they eat shitty diets, and they end up with low testosterone and high estrogen. I see it all the time. DHT is going to increase masculinization, increased hair growth. It could cause baldness, increased sex drive, potential prostate hyperplasia. You're going to have increased aggression. You are going to, at super physiological doses, you are going to see some anabolism. Testosterone is not the strongest anabolic, but it is an anabolic. There is an androgenic anabolic rating system that they use. I don't know how accurate it is. You can debate it, but there is a rating system used, and testosterone is the base for all other hormones. It's equal parts androgenic and anabolic, according to this.
Yeah, test is what an 100 anabolic rating and a 100 androgenic rating.
Correct.
And then, you look at like a trend and it's got something, like a 500 and a 500 rating or something like that.
Yeah, now in practicality, is trend 5 times as potent as testosterone? Maybe not. I don't know. But it's definitely not. It's definitely more potent. Anybody who's taken it can attest to that.
And I'm sure it's largely dependent on genetic variables. Yep. Certain people metabolize the drugs differently or just have different interactions with it. I think there's sort of this misconception with testosterone that you're going to run one cycle and just blow up and just be jacked and put on, 50 pounds of muscle.
No, it
But
doesn't work that way.
that's not the case, right? It's just a slow process where the scales have been tipped in the favor of muscle protein synthesis, like nitrogen retention, and the various anabolic factors have now been tipped in your favor. But ultimately, it's going to be the food and the training stimulus that allows that hormone to enhance those effects.
Well, I mean, you can think of it this way. And this is an analogy I've heard Justin use, and I really kind of like this. Your body's sort of like a construction site. The food is the building supplies. It's the, what the bricks, the wood that
Right.
come to the site. The testosterone or the anabolics are the workers, the guys that are actually building the house, and then your training is like the supervisor telling them what to do. I love that analogy. I'm probably slaughtering it a little bit, but really, if you think about it, if you're sitting on your ass and taking a bunch of shit, it's not really going to do a whole lot. You look at the studies. There were, these were completely natural people that were sedentary. They did have some accumulation of muscle tissue from starting it, but we all know that doesn't continue.
Right. People love to recite that study, and I think there's this idea that, you just take this group of sedentary individuals, you put them on testosterone, and then suddenly they look like bodybuilders, right? It's like, no, you're talking about untrained sedentary individuals with very
Probably
low
hypogonadal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So they go from, the fat slob to a slightly less fat slob with a little bit more muscle. But you would never look at someone like that and be like, oh, that guy must be on steroids, right? I mean, hell, you look at most people on steroids, and you would never assume that they're on steroids because they have absolutely no formidable physique to show for it. And to go back to another Justin Harris point, Justin, shout out to you if you're listening to this. But you talk about what is the distinguishing variable between top bodybuilders and your just average gym bro, and most people would just instinctively say the drugs, and it's like, no. Everyone's taking the drugs. It's probably the gym bros who are abusing it more than the pros. It's the diet, right? Everyone at Gold's Gym's doing the same bro split or push-pull legs or whatever, probably training relatively hard, and they're taking drugs. But you look at the guy at the Gold's Gym, you never see them change. They look the same year after year after year. What is it that the bodybuilders do differently? It's the diet, the way that they eat year-round that allows them to build the physique they have.
Diet, discipline, structure. I mean, it's all these things. Like nobody's one pill or a shot away from being a professional athlete. It's consistent work over a long period of time. I mean, don't get me wrong, the tools help, but they don't do the work for you.
Right.
You still have to put in the work.
I had the first time I ever ran a cycle of testosterone. It was my first ever cycle, and I had been training for years. I was a pretty advanced lifter, and I got on it, and I went into this mode of, I'm just going to eat everything in sight. I'm just going to get huge, and I see the scale going up and up and up, and I'm fooling myself into thinking, oh, I'm gaining all this muscle, I'm getting stronger. And the next thing I know, at the end of this 16-week first cycle, I've gained 40 pounds of bloat and fat. I'm red in the face, breathing heavy. Yeah, my squat, my bench have gone up because I've just gained all this additional leverage from just all the just bulk and fluff through the midsection that I had. But I approached it completely wrong. I didn't have a dialed in diet. I thought, I'm on the testosterone. I'm just going to eat everything. This is all I need. And I'm just going to instantly get stronger and jacked. And no, I just got fat and bloated and unhealthy.
Yeah. And that's the thing that I think this is where bodybuilding sort of tells the truth. When you diet down and get ready for the stage, that's when you find out what's really there.
Yeah.
And I think that's why a lot of young guys will gravitate towards things like D-ball. And will run high doses of testosterone, and just they see the scale go up, and it's just water retention.
Right.
At the end of the day, it's just bloat and fat, and I mean, really, like this is an example I like to give. Bodybuilding example, but Nick Walker is probably, he's in a 10-year span of time, he probably put on more size than just about any human being ever has. And it was 100 pounds over a 10-year period of time. Now, granted, it's not linear. You're probably going to put on 15 one year and then 12 and then 10. It's going to go like that. But I mean, you average that out. That's 10 pounds a year. That's like 0.8 pounds a month, 0.2 pounds a week of lean tissue that's gained. You can't even measure that on the scale.
Yeah, everyone always just severely overestimates the amount of actual contractile tissue they're adding, right? You hear everyone say, oh, I gained 20 pounds of muscle in 6 or 8 weeks. It's like, no, maybe you gained half a pound of muscle and then you gained 19 and a half pounds of glycogen, intramuscular water, and increased blood volume, body fat, things like that. I mean, muscle building is a painstakingly slow process, even on PEDs, right? And like you said, the Nick Walker example, I mean, you're talking about the genetically elite, right? A human being who was selected by the gods to be a bodybuilder, and he's training properly, dieting properly, using gear. And like you said, the best case scenario is putting on average 10 pounds of muscle per year.
Yeah. Now, granted, he probably had some I find that like growth comes in spurts. It does seem you'll have these breakthroughs and then you plateau and then it holds there. But I mean, if we just want to break down the averages, that's what the averages are. His gains might have been something like 15, 20 pounds his first year on PEDs, and then 12, and then 8, and then 5. Like bodybuilders, like once they get to an advanced level, I mean, if you can scrape out a pound or two a year, that's it. And then eventually you hit your genetic cap. There's just only so far you can go. There's only so many muscle cells you have, so there's a difference between hypertrophy and hyperplasia. That's where growth hormone can enter the picture, and you might be able to defeat your genetics a little bit and promote hyperplasia, but there's some debate over how much that really happens too, through IGF-1 and growth hormone. So you create new muscle cells, new satellite cells, where that you have new tissue to grow, but a lot of that's being younger too. Like you get to a certain age, and that just doesn't work anymore as well too. So I do find that the guys that tend to get the biggest started lifting young. And I'm not saying taking PEDs young, but it's the guys that played sports, the guys that lifted. Most of the dudes that don't find the gym until their late 20s or early 30s or whatever, their upper limit is really not that high. So I do think genetics do play a certain role in it, but I think some of it is like when you're 13 years old or 14 years old and you get on the football field or you get into the training room, it's like you're on PEDs to begin with. You have all these extra satellite cells, your body's primed to grow. So that's the time to really make hay. And most of the guys that are at the top of bodybuilding started lifting really young.
Right.
They maybe found PEDs later on. It's the same thing with athletes, man. I mean, you generally don't become an NFL player starting to play football your junior year in high school.
Right.
You've been playing since Pee-wee.
Yeah, exactly. Well, talking about kind of age and starting at a young age versus an older age, let's say a young version of yourself approached you, young natural Paul Barnett approached you and said, what age should I wait to start taking stuff? What would you tell that version of yourself, assuming they wanted to go be a bodybuilder and compete? How young is too young?
I would say you got to at least get fully through puberty. I don't know that I put an exact age on it, but I think you have to go through the process of actually earning your stripes and maximizing. Like if you start it doesn't matter what age you start at, but if you start at year 1, you haven't really even learned how to lift yet. You haven't learned how to eat yet. You're not going to maximize those gains. And really like that, from that first couple of years of training, that even without, you have these spurts of where growth happens. It seems like looking back on it, it's like when you first start lifting, that first year you start lifting, it doesn't matter what you do, you have just this crazy progress.
Right.
You don't even have to eat right. And then like the next phase is like when guys start to figure out diet, then they have another breakthrough, and then you kind of get stuck. But it takes 3 to 5 years to get to that point of being in the gym. And then the next adventure is, oh, I'm going to take some PEDs, and then you have this other breakthrough, and then things kind of stagnate again. And then really the only place left to go then is just to dial things even more. But those are really kind of the three major breakthrough points that I see. Maybe adding growth hormone into the mix. That's another area where I see guys have other breakthroughs again. But then after a while, you just kind of hit your limit. But I would say, long story short, like going back and thinking about the younger version of me, I would have told me to just really learn how to eat and learn how to train properly. Get 3 to 5 years in the gym, probably more like 5, and then consider it.
Yeah, I agree. And there's value in the concept of kind of playing your cards when you need to play them, right? Like you said, you just go through puberty, you're going to get steroid-like growth effects.
Oh yeah.
Start lifting, you're going to get steroid-like growth effects, right? Don't play all your cards at once.
Yeah, because if you do that, you've painted yourself in a corner. Where are you going to go?
Exactly.
It's the same thing with dosing. Like guys, like they hop on a cycle. They just want to go to max out and maximum, whatever. I don't want to say specific dosing, but they want to go to whatever their favorite pro bodybuilder's doing. That would be the same as trying to go into the gym and bench 500 pounds when you're
exactly
you're at 225. That it just doesn't make any sense. Play and plus you just paint yourself in a corner. Like if you're starting off at maximum dose, where are you going to go when you get stuck?
Exactly.
There's nowhere left to go. So it's this progressive game. I think that's the part that really guys struggle with. Is most people are impatient, and like you said, play the card you have in your hand when you need it. Save those aces for when you need it. There is a time to be aggressive. That's for me, like I got aggressive when I knew I was close to getting a pro card. That was the first time in my life I've ever been aggressive. Really aggressive with a cycle, and it was enough to put me over the top. If I had done that earlier, I wouldn't have probably been able to last long enough. I mean, you beat your health up so much. That's another thing too. You have to, not only do you have to do this for a long time, you have to stay healthy while you do it. If your training sucks and you injure yourself, if you make yourself sick from taking PEDs, you're just not going to last long enough to accumulate the type of size that's necessary to be a professional.
Yeah, when you look at what's the best way to ultimately reach your potential from a physique standpoint, from a muscle mass standpoint, it really seems like, hey, if you can string together a decade of just consistency, right? Where you're eating a solid diet year round, you're training effectively, if you're getting into bodybuilding and stuff, you're using a basic moderate level of PEDs. If you can string together 10 years without a catastrophic setback, without having that major injury, without having to take that year off for health phase, you'll probably reach your ultimate potential. And it's not going to be a matter of, who had the most unique, complex drug protocol, or who had the most unorthodox carb cycling plan, or who was doing the most advanced training. It's who can stay consistent the longest, do things right the longest, and not have those health setbacks, those injury setbacks, which you come out of the gate just running the high doses, doing the crazy shit. You're going to have those setbacks. You're going to have that health scare, or you're going to get too big, too strong, too fast, then you blow your pec, right? Whereas just play the slow game. You're going to reach your potential if you just stay in this thing long enough.
What do they say in professional sports? You can't make the club in the tub.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you gotta be able. It is a very much a long game. It's a very sustained, long-term thing, and most people are concerned with immediacy. Like I don't remember who told me this, but this is an analogy I liked. It's like you don't climb Mount Everest for the view from the top, right? It's the journey up to the top. Really, that's the enjoyable part. Honestly, the building, the progressing, the incremental improvement. And I don't know, I'm kind of off this steroid topic here, but I really think that just teaches you lessons in life. You can apply all that to business. You can apply it to really anything. if you're willing to commit to a process, if you're willing to stay disciplined, if you're willing to grind, you can apply that to really just about anything that you do. That's it's a transferable skill set.
Yeah, that's one of the things I've really appreciated about a bodybuilding diet. So I've never competed on stage, but every year I'll go through a full-on bodybuilding prep type diet where I'll diet down, get nearly stage ready lean. And there's something about going through that process that it makes you mentally better, right? You're just having to do a really hard thing where every single day you're faced with decisions where you're hungry, you want to eat things that you can't eat. And every day you've got to make a decision to not give in to your hunger. You've got to make the decision to prep all your meals, to nail your 5 to 6 meals daily, to do your cardio, to do your training. And if you can do that, you learn so much about yourself. You gain so many lessons that, like you said, you can apply to anything, to business, to relationships. I always encourage people like, hey, and PEDs aside, but go through a diet phase. Like get yourself really lean. Like take on that challenge. You'll learn about a lot about yourself, and you'll probably come out the other end a better, stronger, mentally tougher individual.
You think about it, man. Like I generally hang out with people that are success driven, but if you just look at the average person, how many people ever really do anything that's hard in their life, where they've had to struggle, where they've had to grind, where they've had to work? It's like, I think it's part of developing you as a quality human being, having to go through that struggle and that ability to. I mean, it applies to everything. Like it's even the social media stuff. Like I've been grinding away at this shit for 5 years, and then finally, you have breakthroughs. People only see the breakthroughs. So they only see you winning the pro card. They only see you getting drafted in the NFL. They don't see all the blood, the sweat, the hours, the dedication, the sacrifices that go into. Same thing with success. Like I think people a lot of times resent people with money, but they don't understand the sacrifices that were made to get there. And most people aren't willing to make those sacrifices. But I do think, a little struggle, that's another lesson. Like I think, like I try to teach young men is do hard things.
Yeah, hell yeah.
Do hard things. Learn to do hard things and to get through hard things. That's one thing I can thank my father for. My dad was a fucking hard ass, man. He wouldn't accept me giving up on shit and not working hard. That was definitely a lesson I learned at a young age.
Yeah, I need challenges in my life. Like I need something difficult to chase after.
Sorry to get off the PEDs.
No, we'll get back on it. I'll close it out or close out this tangent. But I hear about people they're like, man, I just want to get to 50 and retire so I can just be hanging out on the golf course. And I'm like, I just can't relate to that. Like I would be so depressed just having this life of ease. Like I need something hard to be chasing after. Like I need a fire lit under my ass.
I was honestly a little depressed after I won my pro card. I was just like, what do I do?
Yeah.
It was like, what do I do now? But, and then, it's the same thing. Yeah, I'm sitting here, I'm 51, man. I still work 12, 13 hours a day, every day.
Yeah, well, like you said, you get to the top of Everest, it's not about the view, it was about the journey. And you win that pro card, it feels like, all right, climb's kind of over.
And this does relate to the PEDs. I mean, the lesson here, it's just going back to, what I would tell the younger self or myself is embrace the grind. The PEDs are a tool to help you with the grind.
Exactly.
And then you play those tools intelligently to get yourself to success. Like you don't, like planning, like coming out of the gate running max doses to me is like buying 1,000 lottery tickets and hoping you'll be a millionaire. That's not going to work.
To put it in like, to bring it back to bodybuilding terms, like if you're going into a diet, you're not just going to start off with rock bottom calories, right? You're going to start with food higher, and over time, based on the body response need, you start to adjust the diet, bring your food down, right? Whereas if you just start your diet with calories at rock bottom, you just instantly plateau and you have nowhere to go from there. So it just comes back to the play the cards as you need them. thought process. But
incremental progress and progressive nature and everything that you do is how you get better at shit, and how and you slowly ratchet things up as you go. That's how you become better, and the PEDs are no different.
Well, just closing out the testosterone and the AAS topic, and then we'll touch on GH and insulin and some peptides and get you out of here. But what are some of the main side effects and health issues that you're going to run into with your basic anabolic steroids?
Testosterone is it's bioidentical, so we know how it's going to react in the body. When you get off onto other side anabolics, like say tren or other things, these are not things that naturally occur in the body. So a lot of times they're a bit more unpredictable. So testosterone, I mean, we know pretty well. I mean, you could have some of the androgenic side effects, like we talked about, like hair loss, aggression, things like that we can deal with pretty easily. Estrogen conversion, usually that's the area that I find where they hit a limit of how much testosterone they can tolerate before they need to manage estrogen. So that's an area that we need to keep an eye on. Things that you'll see on blood panels, increased red blood cell count, hemoglobin, hematocrit, that just happens with everybody. It doesn't matter if you're on 2,000 milligrams of testosterone or 200. It's going to increase EPO. Your blood's just going to be more oxygenated. I think doctors panic and overthink that, and I've yet to see, the risk of blood clot from that is very low, as long as you don't have some sort of clotting disorder. Sometimes you do see some lipid skewing. A lot of times HDL will be a bit suppressed. Sometimes you will see LDL increase. That's why you need to be more careful with your diet. But really, like long term, if you think about the things that kill bodybuilders, when you see bodybuilders die from long term steroid use, really the most common thing is just cardiovascular events, and those are the most common causes of death in men anyway, up to 65 years old. So important things that you're going to need to manage when you use testosterone or use any PEDs is really your cardiovascular health. I think is first and foremost. Manage the blood pressure. Make sure your lipids are staying relatively within range, keeping a close eye on that. You do need to pay somewhat of attention to your hemoglobin, hematocrit, and red blood cell count. Make sure that those are, relatively within safe zones. And do cardio and don't eat like shit. That really, the diet. Honestly, the diet is the biggest thing. I'll see guys go on contest prep, and their blood work's actually better after contest prep than it was in an off season. And really, the only thing that changes is cardio and food.
Yeah, exactly, and just the nature of being not as big, right? You're going to be lighter, less body fat. And would it be safe to say, we talk about the cardiovascular risks and events. I think people sometimes think that testosterone is going to be like this toxic that acutely kills you, right? And that's not the case. It's chronic and slow over time. And would it be safe to say that one of the single biggest real killers is just being huge? Look at your bodybuilders and you're 300 pounds at 5'8". Did steroids contribute to getting to that size? Of course, but it wasn't the steroids in and of themselves that killed you. It was the fact that you got up to this massive size that puts so much additional strain on your heart, your blood pressure goes up, and all the things that come with that.
Well, there's a reason why doctors use BMI as a predictor of overall health. I mean, when we're talking about mortality, BMI is probably the single biggest factor that, granted that, if you're 300 pounds and 10% body fat, you're probably better off than being 300 pounds and 50% body fat, but it's still 300 pounds. It's active tissue that your heart has to work through. Your organs are working harder. Everything's working. And when you're eating a shit ton of food, insulin resistance, there's all these other things that go on. It's the secondary effect. It's probably the lifestyle really that's the danger of just being a large human being. Large things generally don't live that long. You don't see many 7 foot tall guys walking around at 70 years old, period. You don't see
Yeah.
many 300-pound jacked bodybuilders that are 70 years old. They just don't exist. So at some point, and that's a realization I'm having right now. I've kind of downsized a bit. I would like to do one more pro show, but I'm down to 240 right now, which is the lightest I've been in years. I'm trying to protect my cardiovascular health a little bit and think about longevity a little bit more. But most bodybuilders eventually come, or even, you see it in football players, they downsize eventually.
Yeah, and that's a fate I'm eventually going to have to accept as well. As I
You
know
still
there's
got
going to
some
come a
years in
point
front
where
of you.
I do. I'm 31, but there's going to come a point where I can't be 6'7", 330 anymore. I'm going to have to downsize, lose some muscle mass, and
Yeah.
enjoy life as a skinnier and fit, hopefully shredded, 250, right?
Yeah.
And like you said, big things have shorter lifespans. I've got a Great Dane at home, and the life expectancy for a Great Dane is like 8 years old. And a
Yeah, I got
big
my
part of that
English
is just,
Mastiff laying behind me. They
yeah,
only
they're
live,
they're they're
eight to
big
10 years.
creatures, right? Just your organs have to work a lot harder. You're just putting more mileage on the vehicle that is your body when you're at a big size.
Well, the
So
single biggest risk factor for PED users, regardless of whether it's testosterone or whatever else, it's just managing cardiovascular health. I would say if you prioritize cardiovascular health, you're going to have a better odds of being okay. Blood pressure, lipids, um, things related to those, and making sure that you're getting regular checkups and stuff. I mean, those are some of the stuff we do is pretty crazy. Limiting stimulant use. I mean, there's all these other things that
right.
that contribute to poor cardiovascular health. Doing cardio, eating healthy.
And then, you get into the orals. Now you're talking about liver toxicity, which is something that is not as big of a factor with the injectables. Do you think beginners make the mistake of going to oral only cycles first?
Yeah, it seems safe, but it's actually the worst thing to do. I mean, I did the same thing, when I was younger. Everybody associates needles with being a drug addict. So,
Right.
there's
It just comes with that stigma, right? Intravenous drugs and heroin. You think needle, you instantly think hardcore and danger, when in reality, it's the pills that carry a lot more acute risk with them because
And I'm
they're
not even, honestly, with the orals, I'm not even as concerned with the liver health as much as I am with the effects they have on lipids, because of how they affect the liver metabolism and in that way. And you really have massive skewing of how your body metabolizes lipids. There's suppression of HDL, increased LDL. I mean, your lipoproteins get out of whack. There's just a bunch of stuff that happens from long-term oral use. I've, to my best of my knowledge, I don't know of any bodybuilder that's died from liver failure.
Yeah,
And
the
I'm
liver
not,
is a very resilient organ.
and I'm not saying you should go out and pound orals, but it's usually the effect that they have on blood pressure, the effect that they have on HDL, the effect that gut health. They're terrible for gut health. You see a lot of older bodybuilders or guys that have abused orals end up with ulcers and ulcerative colitis, and gastric problems, and some of that just comes from eating a shit ton of food, from just being a large human being. But the orals certainly don't help. I with orals, I very limited use of them. I wouldn't run them for more, even Anavar, I wouldn't run it for more than 6 to 8 weeks. And just, it's like something that you use periodically, like as a finisher for a cycle or getting ready for a show or something. But I'd say
Right.
sticking with the injectable compounds is going to be long term, is going to be safer.
Yeah, and then there's just this inherent attractiveness about the orals. It's just you just take a pill, right? It's easier, and needles are scary, so people have a tendency to want to gravitate towards that first, which, like you said, they're making a mistake. But moving on here, I want to touch on GH and insulin, and obviously these are topics that could be full-length podcasts in and of themselves. So I think we can kind of just go on a little bit of a surface level here, but let's go into growth hormone. Can you give just basic surface level overview of growth hormone, what it is, how it is practically applied in a bodybuilding or performance enhancing context?
Yeah, I mean, growth hormone. It's not so much the growth hormone that makes people grow. It's the downstream effect of IGF-1 that
Right.
happens with growth. Um, Growth hormone is a pretty fascinating. It's a peptide. I guess it's not really a hormone in the traditional sense of like testosterone is. It's not a steroidal hormone. It is a peptide. It you're going Growth hormone is going to stimulate increase IGF-1 production, and IGF-1 production is going to increase things like hyperplasia. Growth hormone is also lipotic. You'll see a shift in how people body composition on growth hormone, and this is why blood sugars will tend to get higher on growth hormone. Sometimes you'll see because it shifts your body towards fat metabolism, lipolysis, and as you're eating carbohydrates, you'll see glucose levels rise, and most of the time that is just a temporary effect. I guess long term you could have permanent insulin resistance from increased insulin production to deal with those increased blood sugars, but that takes years. But generally, I don't see people have permanent insulin resistance from growth hormone. It's sort of a misnomer. I mean, I guess it could be a long term risk if you're abusing it long term. So you'll see guys use insulin with growth hormone to counteract. Insulin and growth hormone are counter-regulatory hormones. Insulin promotes storage of nutrients. Growth hormone liberates fat from the fat cell. So they're kind of they're counter-regulatory. They work against each other. So bodybuilders will use insulin to force the issue, to deal with the increased blood sugar. And it's kind of fascinating how it works. I mean, this is just kind of my speculation, but you'll see it where guys get leaner. You're eating more carbs, and you're actually limiting the amount of, because the way it shifts fat metabolism. It's not that it makes it impossible to get fat, but it definitely shifts the way that the body metabolizes fat, and so you're in more of a fat burning state, and it actually reduces insulin sensitivity in the fat cells, and you can use insulin to force the issue, but as long as your muscle insulin sensitivity is high, and have this effect where you're jamming glycogen basically while you're not getting fat. So I mean, that's how guys really the two get paired with each other and have synergistic effects, and it also increases IGF-1 production as well. I mean, there's just this cascade of mTOR is increased, AMPK is lowered. That's why really it makes sense when you're using growth hormone to probably pair insulin with it, especially if you're eating carbohydrates, that it can have a beneficial effect. You could sort of have this super compensation effect, and bodybuilders figured this out probably in the 90s, I think, is when you first saw insulin use in bodybuilding. But the slippery slope of insulin use is the more you use insulin, the more you risk insulin resistance, and over time that kind of becomes a problem, and guys can turn themselves into diabetics over
Right.
a long period. I'm a type 1B diabetic, so I'm acutely aware of managing my blood sugars. But
Got
it's
it.
just growth hormone's pretty fascinating. And I think a lot of times, like you see in older dudes, this is why you see a lot more older bodybuilders now, and you didn't before. Like it used to be guys would be peter out in their late 30s and they would be gone. And I think that growth hormone production bottoms out as you hit, I mean, you'll see it as you hit your late 30s, early 40s. And I don't think guys are really making satellite cells anymore. There's not this ability to synthesize new muscle tissue. And growth hormone sort of is a biological hack in a way around that. And you'll see guys growing in their 40s and 50s, even 60s now.
Yeah, I mean it's used as an anti-aging drug when it comes to HRT applications, right? It kind of has this longevity type effect.
Well, the interesting thing is it's actually increasing cellular turnover, so you're probably shortening your life. But it makes you look
Yeah,
makes you look younger
right.
in the mean term. So, but yeah, I mean, it's going to have increased you're going to have increased collagen production. You're going to have, which is going to help with joint connective tissue issues. It's going to also help with, how your skin looks. You're going to have increased, cell turnover and collagen production. It's going to, like I'm not saying I look young, but I don't think I look 51.
No, you definitely look younger than that.
Yeah, I mean, so
especially if you took that shirt off and everyone saw those abs.
It's a very, very interesting hormone, and I think it's sort of the missing piece of the puzzle that a lot of guys they get hyper focused on the anabolics, and they forget about the other pathways for growth. They just bludgeon the androgen receptor, and they forget about the IGF-1 pathway. They forget about nutrient partitioning. I mean, there's also the consideration of insulin sensitivity. There's also the consideration of insulin production. There's also also like things now like GLP-1s that fix metabolic disorders that limit growth and stuff in people that are aging.
Right.
So there's just a lot of new tools now.
Yeah, you've talked about the value of leveraging multiple anabolic pathways as opposed to, like you said, just putting all the eggs in one of those baskets where you're going to have a lower ceiling of diminishing returns, and you're probably going to incur more health issues if you're just taking the steroids and going all in on that, or if you're just doing the growth hormone, right? Whereas if you just kind of take a moderate approach with multiple of these different anabolic factors, a little bit of AAS, a little bit of growth hormone, a little bit of insulin, and use them in a way that makes strategic sense, then you can kind of get this 1 + 1 = 4 type effect, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's and I think people forget about that. They just assume that it's all steroids, and not all steroids work the same either. There's genomic action, and then there's non-genomic action. We have a steroid like Anadrol, which doesn't seem to have any action on the androgen receptor, but clearly it fucking works. They're not even 100% sure how it works. It's all non-genomics, you have CNS stimulation, increased force production. You can take Anadrol. I don't know if you've messed with it before, but you can go in and you're significantly stronger day one.
Right.
So
you get that immediate acute effect, strength, and it's a favorite among powerlifters and strongman competitors.
That's all nervous system effects.
Right.
But really, I mean, growth hormone, really it's the indirect effects of IGF-1 that really are what are going to stimulate muscle growth for us. I mean, there are some other things. There's increased muscle protein synthesis, but steroids are better at that than growth hormone are.
Right.
So, I mean, and they do promote some cellular repair, for recovery. I would think, honestly, if I were a professional athlete, I probably would just use peptides and growth hormone.
Exactly. And that's exactly what we kind of touched on earlier with the football players. But, from a physique, muscle, body composition standpoint, would it be fair to say that the kind of short-term benefits you're going to get from growth hormone are more in the body composition, body fat realm,
the
right?
lipolysis. I mean, it's just a really expensive fat burner at the end of the day,
right,
for that.
But long term, we get this, like you said, the IGF-1 driven effects, but that's a much slower long term process.
Yeah, that's not going to happen overnight. I mean, we can satellite cell proliferation. I don't recall the exact numbers on it, but it takes something like 60 to 90 days for a satellite cell to fully mature. So, I mean, you're talking about months, years to see the long-term benefits of it as far as muscle growth goes. But, recovery, I don't know why it's just not standard protocol post-surgery. I would think orthopedic surgery you should just run growth hormone and some healing peptides like BPC and TB500 just automatically post. I'm having shoulder surgery in 2 weeks. I'm planning on running both.
Why do you think that's not the case?
Stigma. It's the stigma. It's the performance enhancing drug. I was talking to my orthopedic surgeon about. I mean, there are plenty of studies. You can look on PubMed. There's plenty of studies that show a significant reduction in recovery time. I think I saw one on ACL repairs where it was 20% reduction in recovery time from running, just a moderate dose of growth hormone. I mean, who wouldn't want
Yeah,
that?
yeah, exactly. Which, when they outlawed like BPC 157 and TB 500, when WADA outlawed it, I just don't understand that. You're taking these compounds that what they do is they just aid in a healing process, right? It will accelerate post-surgical recovery, coming off of an injury, whatever. I don't understand why things like that get outlawed. I mean, how much of a benefit that could be to athletes, their careers, their long-term health, and
Don't even get me
but
started on WADA. It's just a silly organization. Uh,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, like, the hilarious thing is that there was this chronic use of painkillers and anti-inflammatory drugs to compensate for this stuff, and there is I don't remember the exact study I saw, but there was they looked at retired, I think it was linemen from the NFL, and there's just a disproportionate amount of them that had kidney problems,
yeah.
and they found that it was from the abuse of NSAIDs.
Oh
Guys,
yeah, just I mean, back in the 90s, early 2000s, I mean, these guys would get off the practice field and they'd have a, you know, handful of Vicodin or Percocet waiting for them. And then back in the locker room, then just pushing, like you said, the just high NSAID dosages and just all these different pharmaceutical painkillers or anti-inflammatories, just wreaking havoc on their health, creating lifelong addiction. And
these guys would have been better off on growth hormone and some peptides. They a lot of guys died because of these stigmas.
yeah,
In fact, not only would they have been better off, they probably, or they probably would still be alive and more healthy. A lot of dudes would have been, their long term health would have been better with just a moderate managed use of these things. That's the maddening part of it. It's literally nonsensical. It doesn't make any fucking sense at all. These are things that help heal rather than masking like painkillers and NSAIDs. All they're doing is masking the issue, not actually healing. Or same thing with anabolics. Anabolics grow tissue. They heal. Well, I don't, and they can be abused. They can be problemsome if you go nuts with them. But yeah, it's just maddening, man.
yeah. I mean, you look at someone with HIV or some sort of muscle wasting disease, and they're probably going to be prescribed some testosterone or some sort
Or
of
growth hormone.
yeah.
Serostem is the standard course of protocol for HIV. Has been for 2.5 decades now.
Yeah, I wonder if this stuff will become more mainstream and
It
accepted and utilized. And
seems to be heading that way now. Like, hopefully, like having conversations like these. That was one of the things that I wanted to do, and I got into this, is kind of remove some of the stigma from some of this stuff, and help promote awareness and prevent harm to a certain degree. It seems like there's a more open mind about I remember, like, even a decade ago, you really couldn't get TRT. It was
right,
pretty much impossible to get, and now it's widely available. It seems to be, there seems to be more growing acceptance of it. I honestly, I would hope at some point, like testosterone, really any of the anabolics being on Schedule 3, it's just nonsensical. They're not psychoactive addictive compounds like fentanyl. Like Jesus Christ, they're on the same list.
well, just touching on the psychoactive component, I'd like to address kind of the pervasive roid rage myth. Right? You are you familiar with Chris Benoit, the
Yeah,
the WWE superstar who
yeah.
took his own life after murdering his family, and he was on anabolics as most WWE superstars are, and the correlation that was drawn was, it was the steroids that created roid rage that made him commit this horrible act, right? What would you say in regards to roid rage, myth or reality?
I mean, there are some PEDs that do have an effect on that do pass the blood-brain barrier. I mean, certainly anybody who's ever taken tren, that's undeniable that tren does have an effect on your mood. Um, Testosterone, generally, I don't see any effect. If anything, it makes you calmer and you feel better on testosterone. Growth hormone has no effect on your mood that I've noticed. Certain orals may, anytime you're anything that's going to be high androgen load could increase aggression.
An analogy I like to make is it could be similar to what a woman might go through emotionally or mood wise at a certain point of her menstrual cycle, right? Where there's moodiness or emotion, more emotional, more irritable, whatever. But it's not like this is going to make you psychotic, right? It's not going to just completely change your perception of reality.
The drug that's probably responsible for more murders and crazy shit and people getting into fights and being assholes that no one talks about is alcohol.
Alcohol, yeah. I knew you were going to say that.
Right. I mean, it's not like you take a shot of testosterone and you go knock over a bank and beat somebody up at the nightclub. That doesn't happen, man. People aren't going to rehab for primobolan.
Right? Yeah, exactly. But I mean, it's true. How many cases of domestic violence, how many crimes, how many car accidents and deaths have been a result of alcohol consumption, right? And then, meanwhile, you've got things like weed that are illegal still in many states.
Yeah, I mean, alcohol is probably one of the most insidious. I don't know. Some of the opioids are pretty insidious. And I would, look, here's what I tell people. If you struggle with mental illness to begin with, you probably do need to be cautious with the PED use. Most of the time when I see guys their mood get off kilter, it's usually related to high estrogen of all things. It's not even the androgens that are causing the mood issues. High estrogen can make you depressed. It can make you anxious. It can make you paranoid. And a lot of times I see guys, the mood improves when they get their estrogen under control. But I would say usually when you see dudes lose their shit, it's some combination of steroids and recreational drugs and mental health issues.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
I mean, you're a calm, cool guy. You met me, man. I'm pretty chill. I don't go around beating people up, and I've run ungodly amounts of PEDs before. I might get a little edgy on contest prep, but honestly, a calorie deficit affects my mood more than any of the PEDs do.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, it's probably a lot of just multiple variables that result in some of the more extreme mood related outcomes with certain people. Like you said, you're starving in prep, your recreational drugs.
I will say this: you do need to proceed with caution when using 19-nor testosterone products. Tren, Mint, Nandrolone. I mean, a lot of guys like to use Deca, but 19-nors are synthetic progestins, and they do pass the blood-brain barrier, and progestins do weird shit in a man's body.
Yeah, I mean, you can suddenly be lactating out of your nipples. I mean, then, like you said, some of the potential mental effects, and the history of trenbolone is an interesting one. It was, not developed for any sort of human application, right? It was originally a subdermal implant for pre-slaughter cattle, which, you could get it at a farmer's co-op tractor supply type store at a certain point.
We used to make it.
Yeah.
When I was younger, back in the 90s.
Yeah, bodybuilders would get their hands on these.
I think it was originally developed for human use, and then it was pulled off the market after they realized how crazy it was. I'm trying to recall but yeah, it was. I think it was actually used in women and children at first. But the dosing of it, Parabolin was the name brand that they used to market it as. But I mean, it was really low dose. It was like 76 milligrams or something like that is what they would administer. And it was, it wasn't intended.
Well, if it's going to have any sort of anabolic effect, rest assured the bodybuilders will eventually find it and find some way to mass produce it and leverage it in their favor.
But most of the time, I'll move on from this because I got to wrap up here soon. But most of the time, the mental health stuff that I see is usually not guys going out wanting to mass murder. It's the opposite. I'll see anxiety, I'll see depression, I'll see things like that. And if you're already prone to anxiety or depression, there are certain steroids that seem to exacerbate that. More specifically, the 19-nors. So I would probably avoid the 19-nors, and anything that's super androgenic. I mean, if you're really aggressive with the androgens, that can increase aggression. But I'd say most of the time when I see guys lose their shit, there was some underlying mental health issue that was already there.
Right.
There's almost always I don't know Chris Benoit's story. I remember it, but I remember him. But most of those, and I'm not trying to. I've worked with some WWE guys, so I apologize. The party scene in the WWE is, I think they've cleaned it up now, but it was pretty bad. Most of those guys were, using cocaine and recreational drugs and alcohol. It was, they're on the road. They're men, and they're on the road and they're partying, and that combination of all of the above is probably not great.
Yeah, I mean, you see just radical behavior among celebrities and who are on the road, exposed to lots of drugs and fame and attention. It's just it's a unique lifestyle that can lead you down some dark rabbit holes.
Most bodybuilders I've met are pretty chill.
Right. Well, Paul, I know we're hitting the 90-minute mark here. I know we wanted to get into some insulin and peptides. I think we can probably save that for a round two of this. I knew there was a risk we'd go down some rabbit holes and be unable to cover, all the topics. But I think that this was a great round one, going into some, basics of anabolics and PED history and things of that nature. I'm sure this is enlightening for a lot of my audience. So we'll go ahead and wrap this thing up. Paul, where can people find you?
I am Paul K. Barnett on Instagram and Anabolic Bodybuilding on YouTube. You can find me there.
Guys, go check him out. Find him on YouTube. Check out his podcast. Find him on Instagram. He's a great resource of information. I mean, we literally just scratched the surface on this topic alone. So, guys, stay tuned for episodes of the Hammer and Chisel Performance Podcast dropping every Tuesday. Go to Troponin Supplements. Use code HECK at checkout for a discount. Paul, thank you for coming on the show, man.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me on.
We'll catch you later, guys.